Onions are a must grow in any vegetable garden, and believe me when I say you can't match the taste of homegrown. In this video, I'll be revealing what I've learnt over the years to guarantee bumper results, including whether to start with seeds or sets, how to work out what type of onions to grow, and my secrets behind growing the biggest, best bulbs. Early spring is an exciting time of year for onion lovers because now's the time to get them started. Now there's some debate as to which is best, whether it's seeds, sets, or purpose-sold seedlings or transplants. I prefer seeds because they're a lot cheaper and they'll give onions that are less likely to bolt or flower prematurely. And when that happens, you get a bit of a tough stem that runs right through the bulb. I also find that onion bulbs are biggest when grown from seed. Here are some seedlings I started a few weeks back and they're doing really rather well. But first, let me show you how I sowed them. So I've got a plug tray here filled with sieved or screened all-purpose potting mix. And then I'm just making little depressions in it to hold the seeds nice and tight. Now the easiest way to grow onions is just to multi-sow them, and that simply means sowing pinches of seeds. And I'm going to aim for between 5 and 8 seeds. These will be grown on exactly as they are, as seedlings, then as a little cluster of plants, and then finally a cluster of bulbs. No fiddling around or pulling out excess seedlings required. So as you can see, carefully dropping in, just between 5 and 8 seeds, don't have to be too exact. And now just a little covering to get them on their way. Now late winter is the best time to sow your onions, so I'm pushing it a little bit with these guys here, but there's still just enough time. Now if your conditions are a little bit warmer, say most nighttime temperatures above freezing and daytime temperatures comfortably going above 50 Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius, then I'd just leave them out wherever to germinate. But I'm going to bring these guys indoors just to speed things along as we are running a bit late here. Once they're up, they'll come back out here and then I'll just let them grow on until they reach about 2 inches tall or around 5 to 6 centimeters, at which point they can be planted outside. But if you want to save yourself a little bit of effort and get a bit of a head start, well, you might as well start with sets. Now, sets are basically immature onions that were harvested at this kind of stage last year and then kept in cold storage to sell to you to plant this spring. They do have a bit of a setback though. Because onions are biennials, flowering in their second year, sets do have a tendency to bolt more frequently. That's because they're effectively embarking on their second year. However, having said that, most sets won't bolt and there are a few things you can do to avoid it. Make sure you choose special heat-treated sets and don't plant them too early while it's still quite cold. Spring is the perfect time to plant them, but exactly when will depend on your climate. In my mild temperate climate, I aim to get them in around the spring equinox. Onions prefer a loose, well-drained soil. I prepare mine ahead of planting by adding a layer of either compost or well-rotted manure to a depth of about 1 inch or 3 centimeters. Onions really quite like a soil that's relatively rich in nitrogen. What this will do is encourage plenty of leafy growth, which will in turn help plants to swell those bulbs to get them big and beautiful and as bombastic as possible. Now, I like to add chicken manure pellets at planting time. They smell really good and I know they're going to really help my onions. So just nuzzle your sets down into the soil so that just the very tips are showing. And you want the flatter end where the roots will come from to go down, and then just keep the very pointy bit just proud of the surface. And I'm going to space them about 6 inches or 15 centimeters apart in both directions. Now that's because I want just good medium-sized bulbs. But if you are after really big champion-sized bulbs, or bigger ones at least, then maybe go as far apart as 10 inches or 25 centimeters apart. Now do inspect each set as you come across it, and then if you get any that are a bit soft in the hand or obviously starting to rot, just toss those aside. If your soil is still a bit cold and wet outside when it comes to planting time, well, you have the option of just planting your sets into a plug tray. And again, I'm using an all-purpose potting mix for this and just taking each set, one per plug, and then twisting it down into the potting mix, leaving just the tip sowing. Now these can grow on in here until conditions outside improve, by which time they should have some lovely shoots and plenty of roots as well, and they'll be champing at the bit to get growing and going away. The best thing about growing your own onions is of course the fantastic range of varieties you can grow, from sweet white onions to red onions to punchy yellow onions. Deciding what to grow can be a bit of a head scratcher, but you could do worse than pick an award-winning variety. The other thing to consider is your latitude, how close to or far away from the equator you are, which will determine whether you should be growing short day onions, indeterminate or long day onions. Short day onions will start to bulb out once daylight reaches about 10 to 12 hours. They can cope with shorter summer days, whereas long day onions, for example, need day length to be much longer at 14 to 16 hours before they start to swell their bulbs. So matching up the correct day length of onion is important if you want decent bulbs. Living at 52 degrees latitude, you can see that the onions available to me will be long day onions. These tend to start bulbing up a little bit before the summer solstice. They're also really good for storing, but each different type of onion has its advantages. These here are the onion seedlings I started a few weeks ago, and they're almost ready for planting. I'll be reserving a nice sunny spot for them in good soil, and it's important to only plant your seedlings once the soil is workable and has warmed up just a tad. Now, because these are just a little bit too small and it's just a little bit too early, I think I'm going to pop these back inside and I'll show you some clips of what I planted last spring. Now, because they're grown as clusters, I'm going to set them just a little bit further apart, about 10 inches or 25 centimetres apart in each direction, and each cluster of seedlings will be planted as they are. Absolutely no need for thinning, just get them into your prepared soil. Now the bulbs will be a little smaller grown as clusters, but you should get exactly the same yield as if growing separate bulbs at a slightly closer spacing, or perhaps even more. Now if you're buying in specially sold transplants, then those will be individual little plants and you'll need to set them at the same spacing as you did for your sets. So that's a minimum of 6 inches or 15 centimetres apart in a block, or slightly bigger if you want those bigger bulbs. If you're using our garden planner, you can now drop multi-sown vegetables onto your plan, including onions. Just space them out as usual and it will tell you exactly how many plants you can grow in the area you have. With your onions now planted, it's now just a bit of a waiting game. Your plants will put on good leafy growth, but they won't start swelling their bulbs until the day length is the right length. Now, being strappy leaf plants, they're easily overwhelmed by weeds, so you'll need to keep on top of those. Another advantage of removing weeds as well as proper spacing, that means ensuring that the plants aren't too close, is that you'll get much better airflow between your plants, which will greatly reduce the risk of disease. Now when weeding, remember that onions are shallow rooted, so use a hoe very carefully, or perhaps just weed in between plants with your hand. Onions, of course, love it sunny, but they also like good moist soil, especially when it's time to begin swelling those bulbs. So you know what I'm going to say, in dry weather, that's right, get on and water. This will go such a long way to ensuring bigger, better bulbs, and that's what we're after. If you have it, then do use drip irrigation because it will help to keep the soil moist while the leaves remain dry, and that will again go a long way to helping avoid the disease risk. I like to apply a little bit of a mulch around plants to help lock in moisture and slow evaporation, and it also helps with weeds. I just use sprinklings of dried grass clippings, but you could also use, for example, dry straw or perhaps shredded leaves. If your soil isn't especially rich, then I'd say there's no harm in going in maybe a month or two after planting with a nitrogen-rich organic fertiliser. Something like blood meal would be perfect, just sprinkled either side of your onions and then tickled in with a hand fork. With your seedlings or sets planted, kept watered in dry weather, and your onions given the nutrition they need, you're 99% of the way to a cracking crop of delicious bulbs. Nice one. If your onions should start to flower, no problem, just lift them up and enjoy them as soon as possible, because the bulbs won't continue to swell at that point and they won't store very long anyhow. In fact, onions can be used and enjoyed at any point they become a usable size. But if you want to store your onions for several months, wait until the neck of the onion goes soft, which will cause the foliage to get top heavy and flop over. And once half to 2/3 of the leaves are flopped over, well, you're good to harvest. This generally happens for me about 4 to 5 weeks or so after the summer solstice. Now dig up your onions on a warm, sunny day, then move them away under cover out of the rain, somewhere nice and dry and airy, to continue drying for around 2 to 3 more weeks. Now, drying them on racks is ideal to get a good airflow around them. This curing process will create a papery outer layer which will protect the inner layers so that they keep for much longer. I love having a haul of onions to dip into, so with that in mind, aim to grow at least one variety each year that's renowned for storing well into the following spring. Store your onions in breathable nets or weave them into quite frankly stunning onion strings to hang up and pick off as and when they're needed, and store them somewhere dark, dry and cool where they should keep for several months. Now, I hope you're excited to get your onions started. I can't wait to indulge in mine. I'll catch you next time.